The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, not slipped under the door, not emailed. Hand-delivered by his property manager, who stood outside the glass and watched me sign for it. I remember the exact moment I opened it, because my hands were covered in lily-of-the-valley stems, and I had to dry them on my apron before I could pull the paper out. The studio smelled like greenery and cold water. The front window had the morning light coming through it. It was a good day until it wasn't. The letter stated, in 3 clean paragraphs, that my monthly rent would increase from $3,200 to $4,480 effective 30 days from the date on the page. 14 months into a signed 3-year commercial lease. A 40% increase. I read it twice. Then I set it on the counter next to the arrangement I was working on, and I finished the arrangement. Not because I wasn't frightened. Because I needed to think, and I think better when my hands are moving. And the whole time I stood there cutting stems and wiring wire, one thing kept coming back to me. The addendum, the one he signed at closing, the one I had filed in my building binder, the one I was almost certain he had never actually read past the first page. But to understand why that mattered, you need to know exactly who my landlord was and why I almost let him win. By the end of this, you will understand how one clause in a signed commercial lease and 7 months of documented patience ended everything he had spent 4 years building on other people's exits. You will understand why the day I chose to stay was the decision that cost him far more than he ever planned to collect from me. And you will understand something else, something his own property manager put in writing, 3 words in an internal email, that his attorney could not explain away in a courtroom. By the time we get there, you will understand exactly what those 3 words meant and why they changed everything. Her name was Margaret. She had run the floral design studio for 11 years, renting space across town before she ever found the building on Crestline Avenue. Corner unit. Street level. Original hardwood floors. Parking lot with 12 spaces. The light in the afternoon came through the south-facing windows at exactly the angle that made arrangements look the way she had always wanted them to look, like they had arrived somewhere, rather than been assembled. Margaret was the kind of business owner who kept binders, color-coded, one for suppliers, one for client orders, one for financials, one for the building. She had never missed a rent payment in 11 years of renting commercial space. Not once. Not even during the months after a renovation next door flooded her stockroom with construction dust and she lost $4,000 in inventory. She paid on time, and she documented everything. Those were her 2 things. They were also, eventually, the 2 things that mattered most. The landlord, a commercial property developer she had found through a broker, came with good paper. 5 other commercial tenants in buildings he owned, all reachable by phone, all of whom spoke well of him. Prompt maintenance responses. A lease prepared by his attorney and reviewed by hers. No red flags. His name was Dale Carver. He drove a silver truck and wore a polo shirt to every meeting. He shook hands like someone who expected to be trusted, and for the first 14 months, she had no reason not to. The lease was a standard 3-year commercial agreement. Rent fixed at $3,200 per month for the full term. The only permitted increase, a CPI adjustment, capped at 3% annually, requiring 60 days written notice and documentation of the consumer price index change. Both parties signed the lease. Both parties signed the addendum, which restated those exact terms in plain language. Then, the building next door sold. Margaret noticed it in the third week of October. New signage on the windows. Construction vehicles in the alley. She mentioned it to Carver when he stopped by to check on a drainage issue in the parking lot. He said it was a restaurant group moving in. He said the neighborhood was changing. He said it like it was good news. Then he offered, unprompted, to let her out of her lease early. Clean break. No penalty. He could make that happen. She said no. Her business was doing well. Her clients knew the address. She had just ordered new signage with the Crestline address on it. He nodded, told her to have a good weekend, and left. 2 months later, the letter arrived. Margaret sat with the letter for 3 days before she called her attorney. In those 3 days, she went through every corner of the lease looking for language that permitted what Carver was claiming. She found none. The fixed rent clause was unambiguous. The addendum restated it in plain language. A 3% annual cap was not 40%. Nothing in the document gave him the right to do what that letter said he was doing. On day 4, she took the letter and the lease to her attorney, a woman she had used for contract reviews for 6 years. The attorney read both documents for 11 minutes. Then she looked up and said, "This is a breach. He cannot do this under this lease." Margaret exhaled for the first time in 4 days. Then her attorney said, "But fighting it will take time, money, and patience you may not have. Commercial landlord-tenant disputes are slow, and he controls the building while the case is pending." That last part was important, because the letter was not the end. It was the beginning. 3 weeks after Margaret declined to pay the increased rent, she continued depositing exactly $3,200 per month, the amount stated in her lease. The parking lot went under construction. Not city construction. Not a permitted project. Orange cones and a locked chain across the entrance. Her customers had nowhere to park. She called the city. No permits had been pulled for any work on that lot. No project was registered. The cones sat there for 9 days before she photographed them, time-stamped every image, and filed a complaint with the city's Commercial Code Enforcement Office. 2 weeks after the parking situation began, she received a formal lease violation notice. It claimed she had been operating her business after the permitted hours stated in her lease. The hours listed in the lease were 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. She closed at 6:30 every evening. She had never been in that building after 8 p.m. She had continuous time-stamped security footage, proving it for every single operating day going back 14 months. But the third thing she found, the one that made her sit completely still at her kitchen table and not move for a long time, was not about her at all. Margaret started searching Dale Carver's name in public county court filings. What she found made the parking cones and the violation letter look like a warm-up. In the 4 years before she signed her lease, 3 other commercial tenants had vacated spaces in Carver's buildings after receiving what their own court filings described as unexpected rent increases, fabricated lease violations, and unexplained interference with building access. A skincare studio owner named Patricia, who had tried to file a breach of lease claim and withdrawn it 14 months later, settlement terms sealed. A print shop that left without filing at all. An insurance broker who had been the previous occupant of Margaret's exact unit before her. All 3 had been on Crestline Avenue or in buildings within 4 blocks of it. All 3 spaces had been re-leased at significantly higher monthly rates after each tenant left. Margaret spread the printouts across the kitchen table that night and did the math slowly. If Carver pushed her out of Crestline, the corner unit hardwood floors, South Light 12-space parking lot would almost certainly release at $6,000 per month or more. He stood to gain over $33,000 per year, every year. By replacing her lease with a new one at market rate, she had been looking at a dispute. She was actually looking at a business model. And she was the fourth client. Her accountant called it unwinnable. He used that specific word. Said the cost of litigation would consume any recovery she might see years down the line. Said commercial landlord cases dragged on. Said she should protect her energy and her business and find a new location before Carver found a reason to escalate. Her attorney, when pressed on timeline and cost, gave her numbers that made the choice feel impossible. 6 to 8 months minimum. Attorney fees starting in the low 5 figures. No guarantee of outcome. Her husband sat across from her 2 nights after the accountant call. He was careful with his words, the way he always was when the subject was difficult. He said that the business was strong enough to rebuild somewhere else, that they had done hard things before, that maybe the people advising her were right. She did not argue. She thanked him and went upstairs. She lay on the ceiling for a long time. That was how she always described the sleepless nights. Lying on the ceiling looking down, running every version of the next year through her head. The move, the cost of a new build-out, the clients who might not follow, the reputation she had built at that address. She thought about Patricia, who had tried and stopped. She thought about the settlement she never got to see. Then, she did something nobody had told her to do. At 2 a.m, she went downstairs, poured herself a glass of water, and opened the lease again. Not the main agreement, the addendum. The document that had been restated at closing, that both of them had signed, that she had filed in the building binder and never looked at again. She read it line by line, slowly, all the way through. And on page 3, buried in section 9, she found 3 sentences she had not focused on before. Section 9 of the addendum stated that in any legal proceeding arising from this agreement, the prevailing party shall be entitled to recover reasonable attorney's fees and court costs from the non-prevailing party. Margaret wrote it down on a yellow legal pad. She underlined it twice. Then she made a list. The list had 7 items: the original lease with the fixed rent clause and the signed addendum, both original copies with Carver's signature. 14 months of on-time payment records showing rent paid at the agreed amount every month. The illegal rent increase letter, dated and signed. The city code enforcement complaint documenting the parking lot obstruction with no active permits. Her security camera export showing business hours compliance for every operating day since opening. The 3 court filings she had pulled Patricia, the print shop, the insurance broker who had been in her unit before her. And Section 9 of the addendum. She called her attorney the next morning before 8 o'clock. Her attorney said, "Margaret, the costs of this," Margaret said, "read Section 9 of the addendum." There was a pause on the line, a long one. Then her attorney said, "Give me until end of day." And one name kept coming back to Margaret as she waited. Not Carver's. The name of Patricia's sealed settlement attorney, which she had found buried in the court filings. She had seen it listed in connection with 3 separate commercial landlord cases in the same district over 6 years. She wrote it on the legal pad under the list. She circled it once and set the pen down. Margaret filed a civil complaint for breach of commercial lease and attempted constructive eviction 21 days later. She continued depositing exactly $3,200 per month as required by her lease. She documented every interaction with Carver and his property manager in writing from that day forward. Every phone call summarized by email within the hour. Every inspection request logged with date and time. Every response noted. The court issued a temporary injunction within 3 weeks of the filing. Carver was ordered to cease all actions that could be construed as interfering with Margaret's ability to operate her business under the terms of the existing lease. The parking lot chain came down the following morning. The violation notices stopped arriving. The discovery phase was where the story changed shape entirely. Carver's property management records, produced under court order, showed that the parking lot closure had been described in an internal email as a tenant management strategy. Those 3 words, written by his property manager, sent directly to Carver. With his reply, "Good, keep it going until she makes a decision." That email existed in his own server. His attorney had not known it was there until it was produced. Margaret's attorney read it aloud at the deposition. Carver sat very still. And then came the part Margaret had not expected. The court-ordered records also revealed that Carver had engaged a commercial real estate broker 11 days before the rent increase letter was delivered to Margaret. 11 days before. The broker's report assessed the market rate for the Crestline Corner unit. It valued it at $6,400 per month. Carver had commissioned that assessment before he sent the letter. This was not a landlord responding to market conditions. This was the first step of a plan he had already run 3 times. The 3 prior tenant filings were introduced as evidence of a pattern. Patricia's settlement was sealed, but the existence of her litigation was not. The court reviewed a documented history, deliberate interference, manufactured lease violations, and bad faith attempts to induce early termination in order to release at premium rates. The same playbook, 4 tenants, 4 years, the same 4-block radius. The judge's ruling was not a long document. It did not need to be. Breach of commercial lease. Confirmed. Attempted constructive eviction through bad faith interference. Confirmed. Bad faith conduct in commercial tenancy dispute. Confirmed. Under the attorney's fees clause in Section 9 of the addendum, the clause Dale Carver had signed and never read past the first page, Margaret was awarded her full legal costs. She was awarded 22 months of remaining lease differential, the full amount he had intended to extract from her if she had complied or been forced out. She was awarded punitive damages for the pattern of bad faith conduct the court had now documented across 4 separate tenancies. The total judgment, $47,200. The commercial kitchen company that Carver had already signed a letter of intent with 11 days before he sent her the increase notice. Before her 30-day window had even opened, withdrew their agreement when the injunction became permanent and the building's court history was publicly filed. Margaret opened the studio the next Monday morning at 8 o'clock. She unlocked the front door, turned on the lights, and began filling a wedding order that had come in over the weekend. The light came through the south, facing windows at exactly the angle it always had. People ask me what justice felt like. I always tell them the same thing. It did not feel the way I expected. There was no morning I woke up and felt restored. The nights at the ceiling, those do not come back. The conversation with my husband where he quietly suggested I might be wrong, I can still hear it. Those months do not disappear because a judge signs a document. What justice did was close a door. Dale Carver sent that letter to 4 tenants. 3 left. Patricia tried to stay and settled quietly, which meant the pattern held no public record, no warning to the next person who signed a lease in one of his buildings. I was the fourth. I was also the first to build the folder all the way to a ruling. Because of that folder, the fifth tenant, whoever searches his name before signing, will find something different from what the first four found. They will find a public judgment. They will find the phrase tenant management strategy in a court document, in a property manager's email, in a proceeding he lost. Justice did not give me those months back, but it gave the next person a name to search before they sign. That is sometimes the only thing it can do, and on the right day, it is enough. 6 months after the ruling, a message arrived through the channel. A woman in another city, she ran an alterations and tailoring shop, had been at her location for 9 years. She had received a letter. Different city, different LLC name on the letterhead, but the language inside was nearly identical. 40%, 30 days. She had typed out the key paragraph and sent it to me word for word. I asked her to send me the name of the LLC. When she did, I pulled up the registered agent records for the state. When I saw the name listed as registered agent, I recognized it. If you have received a letter that looks like this, or you know someone who has, drop it in the comments below. You may already be one piece of someone else's folder.